Hey everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IAS in English. My name is Bhanwar Singh, AMX India 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012. And I welcome you on the platform. So let's see who is live right now with us. Good morning, Ramu. Who else is here? Please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live. Again, in today's session, we'll be doing the complete The Hindu analysis, and we'll be moving ahead and we'll be discussing the Delhi edition of The Hindu of today, that is 20th of May 2026. All right, so we'll be discussing this in our today's session, and these are the today's important or the key themes that are there in our today's complete The Hindu that we'll be discussing in today's session. The first one is that we'll be moving ahead and we'll be discussing and even analyzing the petrol or the diesel price hike that had been done, and even the stress that is there or it is building upon the oil marketing companies or the OMCs. All right, then we'll be moving ahead and we'll be discussing about the perspective of the UAPA bail. And over here, there is a news that the Delhi police have suggested that there should be a larger bench of the Supreme Court that must decide about the bail perspectives in the UAPA. All right, then we'll be talking about the recent Nordic summit, India-Nordic summit that had organized or had been organized in Oslo. We'll be also discussing about Iran and US conflict and the Strait of Hormuz as well. Then we'll be moving ahead about the recent outbreak of the Ebola, and we'll be discussing it and the strain as well, that is Bundi Bugyo. Then we'll be talking about the EV grid strategy. Again, it is very important because this is a piece of editorial that will be discussing about India's EV grid strategy. Then we'll be talking about Bhojshala ruling as well as the Places of Worship Act, and then we'll be moving ahead to the Shanti Act of 2025 because a recent PIL had been filed in the Supreme Court. All right, and then we'll be talking about the Supreme Court, which have allowed the euthanasia of the rabid and the dangerous dogs which are there. And Dhruti, Jai Hind. All right, so these are the important key themes that we'll be talking about in our today's complete The Hindu analysis. We'll be analyzing all these key themes along with the others as well in today's session. All right, now coming to the codes that are there, these are the important codes that you can use while framing your answers for the mains. And these are the codes that we have over here. The first one is that every time crude price spike as a result of the tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, India's import bill bleeds. The deeper infrastructure challenge lies not in scooters but in the grid that must eventually power the fleet. All right, so this is related to the editorial that is there, and again this is a powerful lines that I found in the complete editorial that you can use while summarizing how the Strait of Hormuz it gets connected to the EV revolution in India, and as well as why it is very important that the grid must eventually power the fleet in our country. All right, Reshma, good morning, and Amal, hello, good morning, Amal. Just a sec. All right, so these are the important key codes that you can use in today's session for the today's the things that are there. There are another important code that is here is that the personal liberty is not statutory slogan but a constitutional provision that remains the cornerstone of a society governed by the rule of law. When statutory restrictions clash with the fundamental rights, the scale of constitutional justice must tilt in the favor of preservation of human dignity. Good morning, Knight. All right, Shinomi, good morning. All right, so these are the important codes that you can use, and along with this, we have started from yesterday even discussing the word of the day that had been, or it is there in the Hindu. So the today's word of the day is it is decrepit, and decrepit means derelict or run down or worn and broken down by the hard use. So that is what decrepit it means. So decrepit it means. All right. So the usage is that the decrepit building was on the verge of collapse, and over here you can see that this is the word of the day that is there in our today's Hindu. All right, now coming to the first news that we'll be discussing and analyzing is about the price hike of the petrol and diesel, and this is the second time that we have seen just in a couple of days, and this was bound to happen. I have told you even before as well, the price hike, it was just deferred because of the elections, but again the price hike was that was something that was bound to happen because of the energy crisis, that is because of the Strait of Hormuz that is there. Ms. Verma, good morning. All right, now over here, this news, it pertains to your GS paper 3. That is, it touches the energy economy, as well as this is important for your prelims as well as for your mains as well. All right, now over here, the OMCs or the oil marketing companies, they have raised the petrol prices and the diesel prices to nearly about 90 paise per litre on 20th of May. And this is the second hike that we have seen in the 5 days or the previous 5 days that were there. The first hike was on 15th of May, where the price rise was 3 rupees per litre, and it was the first revision in the 4 years that were there. Now, when it comes to the Brent crude price, it is trading, or it is at right now nearly about 110.9 per barrel. And when it comes to the India's crude basket, it is averaging somewhere nearly about $107.3 per barrel in May itself. At the same time, we can see that the rupee is depreciating as well. And rupee has been at the record low of 96.70 rupees per dollar. And this is the 8th consecutive fall that you will see when it comes to the rupee. And this is again very important, because this all is because of, when it comes to depreciation, it is because the US dollar is getting strengthened. And US dollar is getting strengthened because of the rise in the prices that we are seeing in the crude basket that is there. And ultimately, that is creating a pressure on Indian rupee as well. Now, when it comes to the oil marketing companies, their complete losses, it had been reduced from 1,000 crore rupees to 750 crore rupees per day after the revision. But again, still it is unstable and unsustainable, and we may see another price rise again. And this is very, very important, because this will again, it will spill onto the inflation that we may have in India as well. Now, when it comes to the OMCs, we have the oil marketing companies that are, we have the Indian Oil Corporation, BPCL, that is Bharat Petroleum, and Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited as well. These are the oil marketing companies, and government controls the pricing of the oil, that is the petrol or the diesel, through the Essential Commodities Act in India. Now, there is the administered price mechanism that was there in India. All right, that was where the complete price, it was there with the within the hands of the government. However, this was scrapped in 2010. Please remember, it was scrapped in 2010, and afterwards it had been market linked since 2014. Now, Brent crude, it acts as the global benchmark, and India imports nearly about 85 to 87% of the total crude requirements that we have in India. All right, now this is very important, because when it comes to the fuel pricing, so now we have dynamic fuel pricing that is there in India, and here in dynamic fuel pricing, the price are revised daily. But ultimately, this dynamic fuel pricing, it was paused after the 2022, when we had the Ukraine crisis that was there. At the same time, this recent hike in the petrol prices, because of the conflict that have started in the West Asia between the US as well as the Iran, and that have led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is again a very important choke point that is there when it comes to the transit of the oil as well as the natural gas from the region. Now, when it comes to the impact, we have seen that the government have delayed the hike because of the elections that were there. And ultimately, now gradual approaches to avoid the shock that the rising oil prices which had created into the economy, and that is why we are seeing that there will be subsequent price rise again that we will see in the country. Ultimately, when it comes to the rupee depreciation, when it comes to the oil import, the prices of the crude oil that is rising, that is creating the current account deficit that is getting widened and widened every day. Sana, good morning. And the rupee is depreciating further, that we are seeing, and this is where there is a danger level that we are approaching, because ultimately that will spill to the inflation. And there would be inflation that we will see. We are already seeing that there are the prices of the milk that have increased. The LPG prices are also increasing. At the same time, there will be the food prices as well that will increase, because ultimately increase in the fuel cost. All right, fuel is what? When it comes to the fuel is basically used for the transportation. So if there will be increase in the fuel cost, that will lead to the increase in the transportation cost, and ultimately the consumer, they will bear the brunt of the increasing cost that will be there. All right, so again, we will be seeing that the inflation will rise because of the crisis that we are seeing right now. All this at the same time, it will be a burden to the common men. And the two-wheeler commuters, they will be the most hit. At the same time, the EVs, right now we are seeing that they are gaining the traction because of the fuel cost rise, and this is a silver lining when it comes to the EV market in India as well. So there is always the two sides of the coin. All right, on one side we are seeing that there would be the inflation spill that will be there because of the fuel cost that is rising. At the same time, the EV or the electric vehicles, they are getting pushed, or they are getting the traction in India because of the fuel rise. All right, so it will have impact on the EV industry, it will have the impact on the environment as well. Now, at the same time, this is very important because when it comes to the ethical perspective, there has to be transparency in the administered pricing of the fuel that is there, and there should be the cross subsidy for the LPG as well. These are the ethical perspective that you can look after. Now, when it comes to the complete yes, this is double-edged sword. Now, when it comes to the key mechanisms, so there are the under recoveries. Now, what are the under recoveries? Basically, under recoveries are when the oil marketing companies, they are selling below the cost when the crude spikes. That is what the under recoveries are, and ultimately the Brent is beared by the oil marketing companies which are there. Now, for the LPG, it is the government that controls the prices. It had been subsidized through the PEHL as well as DBT or direct benefit transfer since 2015. For the petrol and diesel, there is revenue sharing with the states as well. And the VAT, it adds to nearly about 20 to 35% on the petrol or the diesel. And there is windfall tax as well on the crude production as well. All right, it was levied in 2022 and revised fortnightly. And I have told you what is windfall tax. Windfall tax is basically where there is an industry that is gaining major profit because of the geopolitical or the economic scenarios. That is where we have the windfall taxes which are imposed. Again, important for your prelims, and you have to understand what windfall tax is for the perspective of your prelims examination. Now, these are the causes and the implication. We know that there had been the war between the Iran and US, and that had led to the closure of the Hormuz, and this has led to the shock in the supply chain market. As well as there are the Houthi rebels which are there in the Red Sea region, and ultimately that also poses risk for the Red Sea route as well. All right, so there is the two of the important global choke points, and the two of the important maritime trade routes, they are at the risk. And that is why right now what is happening is that there is more of the transit or more of the container ships, they had been rerouted from or rerouted towards the Cape of Good Hope. Now, Cape of Good Hope is good because it is not that much sensitive region, but at the same time, when the ships are transiting through the Cape of Good Hope, that adds nearly about 20 more days for the complete transit that happens. All right, and there is the impact that we are seeing, that there is scarcity of the LPG that will lead to the Indian Oil Corporations of maintaining the 1 month crude stock that is there. The rupee is falling, and ultimately that amplifies the cost as well, because when it comes to the rupee depreciation, if there is 1% of the rupee that gets depreciated, so that amounts to nearly about $0.5 billion of the additional import cost that is there in India. Now, there is the opportunity as well. All right, that is that we can accelerate the domestic oil production, as well as the electric vehicles, they will get the push because of this global supply chain that had been disrupted because of the Hormuz supply, and as well as there would be the more of the focus over the biofuels that we will see in the upcoming months. So there is the silver lining or the opportunity as well when it comes to the complete crisis that we are seeing right now. Now, coming to the next important news that is there in our today's Hindu is about the Delhi police, which have suggested that the larger Supreme Court bench, it should look after or review the UAPA bail curbs which are there. Now, we have seen this yesterday as well when it comes to UAPA. UAPA is a Preventive Detention Act that is there in India, and it stands for Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and it is being used basically for the terrorist activities which are there, but at the same time it is to curb the unlawful activities as well which are there in India. Lead time increased and logistics cost also get high. That's true. All right, if we are using the Cape of Good Hope for the transit. Now, over here what has happened is that the Delhi police have sought that larger bench of the Supreme Court, it should review the UAPA bail provisions which are there. And also in 2020, what happened was that the Delhi riot accused Umar Khalid and the Taslim Ahmed. They were there and they were prosecuted under the UAPA. Recently, their bail had been denied, and the High Court the High Court order had been challenged when it comes to the bail that had been sought by Umar Khalid and the Taslim Ahmed as well. Now, in the ruling on 18th May that we have discussed yesterday, so the ruling was by the bench of two judges, that is, there were honorable judges. We had judges Nagratna as well as we have Bhuyan. They have said that the bail is a rule. At the same time, jail is an exception, even under the UAPA. Over here, the Additional Solicitor General S.V. Raju, he have argued that the May 18 ruling, it conflicts with the Section 43D, Clause 5, that is the mandatory presumption when it comes to the UAPA Act, and Umar Khalid's interim bail has also been denied recently by the Delhi court, and that happened yesterday on the same day where we were discussing about the UAPA provisions that were there. Yes. Now over here it is very important that UAPA 1967 is the anti-terror law that is there. It is applicable in all of India. Although there are state-specific laws as well, like for example in Maharashtra we have Mokoka that is there. Yes. So over here this is the anti-terror law that is there, and it's Section 43D, Clause 5. It says that bail shall not be granted. It says bail shall not be granted if there is a prima facie case that exists. Now in 2022, in the case of K.A. Najib, the larger bench of the Supreme Court, it had ruled that prolonged incarceration, it can override the bail bar that is there under the article, under the Section 43D for Clause 5 of the UAPA Act. Now over here it is very important when it comes to the NIA Act or the National Investigation Agency Act and the UAPA. Over here there is the higher threshold, and the court must record the reason why the bail must be granted or must not be granted. The presumption had been reversed when it comes to these two particular acts. At the same time, this particular case, it deals with Article 20 and Article 21 and 22 as well. Article 21 that provides for the right to life and personal liberty. Now, in the case of the preventive detention, what happens is that the right to personal liberty, it is forfeited. As well as when it comes to the Article 22, so there is the protections which had been granted in the terms of or in the event of the detention as well. So over here the protection against the arbitrary arrest had been provided, and this is where there is the tension when it comes to the Preventive Detention Act and the constitutional provision or the fundamental rights which had been guaranteed by the Constitution. Now, we have seen that there had been lots of cases when it comes to UAPA, whether it is Shaheen Bagh or Bhima Koregaon or Elgar Parishad. There were the similar bail controversies that have erupted because of the UAPA provisions that were applied or implied. Now, it is very important that when it comes to the anti-terror laws, so it is very important that the tension is between the terror laws which are there as well as the civil liberties, and over here this had been the polarized debate that we are talking about. Now, the bail delays had been, or they act as the de facto punishment for the people. And again, there is another perspective as well, that if a person had been in jail for, like for example, when it comes to Umar Khalid, it had been more than 5 years that he had been in jail. Now, at the end of the decision or at the end of the investigation, if it has been found out that there was no wrong that he committed, all right, I'm taking an example. So then, who will be responsible for putting him behind the bars for those 5 years? All right, so this is very, very important, that this is, the tension is between the liberties that had been provided by the fundamental rights, and also the tension is about preventing the terrorism acts in the country. So there has to be a preventive law that should be there. And ultimately, it is very important that if the preventive detention had been applied, so there should be a mechanism of fast tracking the investigation, fast tracking the complete process, so that the people, they cannot be left behind the bars for a longer period of time. And that is what is required right now. In last year, April, judiciary insisted to give the timelines on giving assent on bill by governor and president, but on contrary, judiciary sit on cases indefinitely without trial. That's true. All right, so this is very, very important that we have to understand. ultimately, when it comes to the legal conflicts, so there is conflicting coordinate bench judgments that we have seen in the Supreme Court itself. There is a Supreme Court bench that have said that the bail has to be denied. Another bench says that the bail has to be given. So over here, there are the conflicting coordinate bench judgments, and there is the need for a larger bench or the constitutional bench that must decide that what should happen in the case of the preventive detention that should be there. At the same time, when it comes to the ethical perspective, this also raises the question about the presumption of the innocence that is there in our judicial system. In our judicial system, it says that until proven guilty, you are innocent. So there is presumption of the innocence in our judicial system as well as the public safety. So there is, there is a need of balance that should be maintained. And ultimately, more than 5 years in the jail or incarceration without any trial, that is also the ethical perspective, because it ultimately affects the human life and the human nature as well. So this is very important. You could be asked in your prelims about what is the section 43D(5) of the UAPA, and even it is very important for the K.A. Najib case that could be asked in your prelims. In your mains, you can try and write the answer that UAPA's bail bar raises serious questions about the right to speedy trial under Article 21, critically examined. Now over here, it is very important when it comes to the normal bail jurisprudence. It is a bail that is the rule and jail is the exception, because there is a presumption of the justice that is there in our judiciary or in our legal system. At the same time, when it comes to UAPA section 43D(5), so there is a statutory bar that the bail is denied if the accusations are prima facie true. That is, innocence becomes secondary when it comes to the preventive detention or UAPA Act that we have in India. So there had been a judicial synthesis, and in the Najib case, it was said that the excessive delay, it violates Article 21, and there is a constitutional right that overrides the statutory bar that had been provided under the UAPA Act in India. Alright, so that is the tension, or again, it is very important when it comes to the political and the legal atmosphere of India. Now, the next important news that is there in our The Hindu today is democracy, rule of law make Nordic nations India natural partners, and it had been said by Modi or Prime Minister Modi. Now, when it comes to our Prime Minister is visiting, he had been at the in the Nordic countries, and there was India-Nordic summit that had been organized. It was the third India-Nordic summit. It was organized in Oslo, and Prime Minister Modi, along with Denmark, Finland, Sweden, as well as Norway and Iceland, the representatives, the head of the states, they were present in this Nordic summit that was organized. Now here in this summit, the ties had been upgraded to the green technology and the innovation strategic partnership. Alright, now focus is upon the sustainable energy as well as the maritime cooperation and even the science and tech or the polar and the Arctic research that will be there between the Nordic countries and the India as well. Now when it comes to all the 5 of the Nordic country members, the leaders, they have also backed India's permanent seat at the UNSC or United Nations Security Council. Alright, paper isn't clear, sir, please. I didn't get you. Tribes Himalaya. Paper isn't clear, please. What paper is not clear? Alright, so all the 5 countries that are there in the Nordic grouping, they have said that they have backed India's permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council as well. Now when it comes to India and Nordic combined, the trade is $19 billion, and it is relatively low when it comes to the trade between both between the groupings that is there. And we have EU-India FTA as well that may impact the boost in the trade between these nations. The next summit of the India-Nordic that will happen in Finland. Again, important for your prelims, you must remember. Now we have the Nordic countries. These are important. Again, you could be asked in your examination. Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Iceland and Norway. They are the Nordic countries which are there. Now, at the same time, when it comes to India's first Prime Minister visit, it was first in the last 43 years, and there is the Ukraine issue as well that was, that was taken up in the summit. And here, the Norway, he has said that the India could happen, or India could help in coming up with the Ukraine truce, because India has closer ties with Russia that is there. So India can use its Russian channels, and it can happen that the Russia and the Ukraine truce that could be organized with the help of India. Now, this is again very important, because ultimately geopolitically it places India again at the strategic foothold, because we have seen when it comes to the when it comes to Pakistan, so Pakistan is acting as a mediator between Iran and US, and at the same time, if India will mediate between Russia and Ukraine, so again the stature of India in the world geopolitics, that will again rise, all right, that will again become incremental. So again, this is very, very important when it comes to the geopolitical tensions as well as the stature of India on the geopolitical scene. All right, India and Russia, the oil transit, if you can see that the Russian crude share, it went from less than 1% to nearly about 40% of India's imports since 2022, since the Russia and Ukraine war have started. As well as it is important for your prelims that when it comes to the Arctic Council, it is 8-member body, and India had been observer of the Arctic Council since 2013, and there is along with the Nordic countries, Russia, Canada, US, which are part of the Arctic Council that is there. Now, when it comes to the green technology, we know when it comes to the world's largest sovereign fund, so it is a Norway sovereign fund or wealth fund that is of the tune of $1.2 trillion, and it can fund the green technology as well, and that is why the ties between these nations and the Nordic countries, it is very, very important. Now, when it comes to the strategic perspective, so multilateral engagement is where the India is focusing right now. All right, at the time of the geopolitical crisis that we are seeing, so India is focusing upon the multilateral cooperation and the engagement, and it is India's Nordic ties that is, we both, the countries of the Nordic as well as India, they are the champions of democracy, as well as India and the Nordic countries, there is the potential of the technology and even the Arctic research that is there. When it comes to India and EU free trade agreement, that also includes Denmark, Sweden and Finland. Norway and Iceland, basically they are not included in the EU framework, please remember. All right, so we have Denmark, Sweden and Finland, they are there in EU free trade agreement. But Norway and Iceland, they are basically under the EFTA framework, that is European Free Trade Agreement framework. That is a separate free trade agreement that was signed between these countries. All right, now India will be balancing between the Russia and Ukraine. That was what has been said in the Nordic summit. We are buying the Russian oil, and ultimately we are advocating for the peace as well. Now, Norway is pushing for the ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, because when it comes to the complete conflict, it is also important to note that it is the eastern flank of the Europe that is directly impacted because of this. And even when it comes to European nations, all right, the European nations, they depend upon Russia. All right, that is one of the reasons why the European nations, they have never come out openly for opposing Russia, because the Russia supplies them the gas. All right, there are gas pipelines from Russia which goes deep into the Europe, and without Russian gas, the Europe will suffer and the Europe may die. All right, and that is because of this that the Europeans, they have never opposed Russia, or they have never openly criticized Russia when it comes to Russia and Ukraine war, and they have also not supported Ukraine in the war. Now, in your prelims, you could be asked about the Nordic countries, even the Arctic Council, and about the United Nations Security Council as well. And for your mains, you can practice India's engagement with European middle powers in the context of changing global order. Discuss. All right. Now, over here, you can see that when it comes to India's input, India has a large green market that we have. Along with this, we have digital scale and even the scientific workforce that is present in our country. Along with this, when it comes to the Nordic countries, they have the clean energy technology along with high value capital and polar expertise. Both of them, when they will be combined together, there will be shared initiatives in the green technology and innovation, Arctic climate research, and the bilateral trade expansion as well. And that is why the trade or the India-Nordic relationship, that is why it is very, very important. Yes. All right, so these are the Nordic countries. These are the major countries that are there in Nordic countries. So these are over here. You can see we have Norway, then we have Sweden. Over here we have Finland as well. All right, here you can see basically these are the Scandinavian countries because there are the Scandinavia mountains which are located over here. All right, there is Denmark as well. Over here you can see that there is Alan Islands, which is of the Finland. All right, then we have Iceland, and here we have Faroe Island as well as Greenland Island, that is under the Denmark, all right, or under the occupation of Denmark. Then we have here Jan Mayen, which is under the occupation of Norway, and even Svalbard, where we have the Arctic Research Station as well that is located. So these are the countries or the territory of the Nordic countries. Right. Now, coming to the next important news that we have in our today's The Hindu, it is about the US may need to attack Iran again if no deal is reached. That has been said by Trump. So again, this is where we are heading to. It is, we'll take a pause, then we will again attack, and that is what the US is threatening Iran again. So over here, we know that Iran and US, they had been under the conflict since the February 28th. And right now, the ceasefire had been stuck between both the countries on 8th of April. All right. And again, over here, what Trump have said that the US may need to attack the Iran again. And I was just 1 hour from deciding that strike. Iran has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. And again, the Strait of Hormuz is very important for the oil transit, for the gas, as well as for the fertilizer route as well. The US sanction waivers, they are there on the Russian oil. They had been extended for the 3rd month as well amid the West Asian crisis or the war that we are seeing right now. And that is a breather for India that we can import the Russian oil once again. There is Qatar as well, which is mediating. The Pakistan is facilitating the US and Iran negotiations right now. And the Gulf leaders, they have urged that there should be 2 to 3 days of the pause that should be taken in the complete crisis that is there. At the same time, the defense system had been activated on the Qeshm Island that is there in the Strait of Hormuz. And here, the population is nearly about 1.5 lakh people. Now here, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, it is a very important choke point. And we have seen this in this year, that this 27-mile wide choke point, it is from where the 20 to 30% of the global transit of the oil happens. This had been at the forefront right from the February 2026. All right, now this is flanked by Oman as well as Iran, and there is Musandam Peninsula of the Oman on one of the side. Now, this had been where the India had been exposed most because the 60% of the LPG, it gets imported through the Persian Gulf. There is crude oil basket as well that is increasing. For India, it is $107.3 per barrel, and there's alternative route that is available, that is Cape of Good Hope, but again that adds nearly about more than 20 days for the complete transit or the voyage. And there is the ton-mile demand that gets upped by 40%. There is also right now we are seeing that the Panama Canal had been congested. The LNG ships, they had been given priority over the LPG, and India's LPG shortage had been highlighted when it comes to the complete news. Now, when it comes to the complete analysis or the impact of the Strait of Hormuz crisis or the West Asian crisis, it is not just India, but the complete geopolitical regime that had been affected because of the complete crisis. In the context of India, so what had been the impact? The rupee, it had hit the record low that we have seen right now, and it was the 8th consecutive decrease that we have seen. Even the crude as well as the capital, they are getting outflowed. All right. When it comes to the LPG, we are nearing the scarcity. US is emerging as the supplier with 4.5 lakh million tons in March itself. But again, it is dropping since March. When it comes to the IOC, it is maintaining 1 month of the crude inventory and diversifying to Indonesia, Nigeria, Angola and Oman as well. At the same time, we have seen the surge in the electric vehicle. The two-wheeler buyers, they are increasing, they are browsing the EV prices, and the fuel cost drives that have driven the complete transition towards the EV or the electric vehicle push that we are seeing. Shivraj Singh Chauhan, he had also flagged that there is the international fertilizer crunch that will be there, and ultimately there are 28 source countries when it comes to the fertilizer import for India that are there. Now, for the global context, what this complete crisis has impacted. Right. Alright, now what this has impacted is that the EU, it has denounced the US waiver on the Russian oil sanctions that had been done. Alright, the Russian waiver that had been extended for the third month because of the West Asian crisis, and this had been denounced by the EU members at the G7 finance ministers meeting. There is also Russia and China angle that we can see. Alright, recently we have seen that the US or the Donald Trump, he had visited China. At the same time, just after the visit of the US president, it was Putin who had visited the China, and afterwards this shows that there are the unshakable ties that are there between Russia and China that are there. Alright, at the same time, when it comes to the nuclear deal between US and Iran, there are the shifting of the red lines, and you can see that the Iran wants to continue with the civilian nuclear program. At the same time, US wants that there should be zero enrichment, and that is where the complete tension is between US and Iran, and that is where the deal had been struck between both the countries. Now here Trump paradox is also there. That is where we are seeing that the oil prices, they are soaring high, and it is not just India which will be hit. It is the US too as well, because the increasing of the price, that is economic pain for America as well. And the Gulf allies of the US, they are urging that there should be pause in the complete scenario that is there in the West Asia. And again, this shows the criticality of the issue as well. We in India, we are going through a dilemma, and that is that India is moving towards a strategic autonomy. All right, we are buying oil from Russia, and at the same time the crisis at the Hormuz had been exposed. So over here, this is a dilemma that India is facing, that how we will manage the complete supply when it comes to the import of the oil, because ultimately when it comes to the oil, so we are dependent for nearly about 85 to 87% of the oil through import. Now over here you can see that this is the complete region. This is the Strait of Hormuz that we are talking about. This is the Musandam Peninsula, as well as this is flanked by Oman, and here we have Iran as well. This is another sea route in the West Asia, and this is Red Sea that you can see over here. It connects, over here Bab al-Mandeb Strait is there that connects Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Alright, and it is flanked by Yemen and Saudi Arabia as well. Over here you will see that the Houthi rebels, they are basically stationed in the Yemen nation. Alright, again, both the regions, they are very important when it comes to the crisis that we are seeing in the West Asia. Next important news is about the Ebola outbreak, and it had been declared PHEIC, that is Public Health Emergency of International Concern, by the WHO. Now when it comes to the PHEIC or Public Health Emergency of International Concern, it had been declared, and there is Ituri province in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and as well as the Kampala, where there had been 131 of the deaths, and there are 513 suspected cases which had been reported. Now, the strain that is responsible for this recent outbreak of Ebola is Bundibugyo. Yes, Bundibugyo strain, which is basically a rare variant of the Ebola virus. And there is no approved vaccine or therapy like we have for the Zaire strain. We have the vaccine that is Ervebo that had been developed for the Zaire strain. And that is why this is very, very important and very crucial as well, because there is no vaccine or the therapy that is available for Bundibugyo strain that is there. Now here, WHO, while declaring the PHEIC or Public Health Emergency of the international concern, it had acted without waiting for the emergency committee, and this is the swift action that had been praised globally as well. Now there is the high positivity rate of the Ebola. There are 8 positives from the 13 samples, and Kampala cases are very important because there is no apparent link that is there, and that is why this is very, very important, because the spread, it can move and it can engulf lots of countries as well as the region when it comes to the Ebola outbreak. Now over here, Ebola is basically a hemorrhagic fever, and there is the fatality rate of about 25 to 50%, and it spreads through the bodily fluids as well as contaminated surfaces as well. The worst outbreak was in 2014-16, where the West Africa was suffered, and there were 28,600 cases that were there, along with 11,325 deaths that occurred in Guinea, in Liberia, as well as in Sierra Leone as well. Now, Bundibugyo strain is quite rare, as well as there were previous outbreaks in 2007 and in 2012 as well. Both the outbreaks that were there previously in 2007 or in 2012, that was in the same region, that is the Democratic Republic of Congo. All right, and in 2012, it even spread to Uganda as well. Now, when it comes to the PHEIC, that is the highest alert that the WHO activates for any of the emergency concerns or the outbreaks which are there, and this is declared under IHR, that is International Health Regulations 2005, which are legally bounded, and ultimately India is also signatory of IHR. Please remember this. And there is Article 12 of the IHR, that is the DGWHO. He is the sole person who determines the PHIEC after the expert committee or emergency circumstances. So this is where the expert committee recommendations were not taken into consideration, or the expert committee meeting was not called for, and the PHIEC, it was swiftly it was declared, and there has been praise about the move that had been taken by the WHO. Good morning, Uzai. All right. Now over here it is very important, because when it comes to the complete region, there are conflict zones which are there in this complete region. In Central Africa, there are lots of conflict zones, and ultimately there will be undetected spread that will happen in these conflict zones. And at the same time, when it comes to Kampala, that links, or it also suggests that there could be wider spread of the outbreak of Ebola in Africa. Now, when it comes to the India, so in India, for any of the outbreaks that happen, we have different framework. We have IDSP, along with we have National Center for Disease Control, or NCDC, and even we have the ICMR, or Indian Council of Medical Research Surveillance, that is there for any of the outbreaks that happens in India. Also, when it comes to the global health, so PHEIC, that triggers the IHR obligations. That is, there are the the travel, the trade, and the data sharing that are automatically they are triggered, and the countries, they have to obey through the different directives that are being given, or they are passed through the WHO in the case as well. It is also important that when it comes to the PHEIC, it is not to the tune of pandemic that was there in the times of COVID era. All right, in your prelims, you could be asked about Bundibugyo, you could be asked about PHIC, and even about the DRC and Uganda as well, or the nations that touches them. And in your mains, you can write or you can practice the answer, that is critically examine WHO's PHIC mechanism and its effectiveness in controlling the outbreaks. All right, so this is complete about the Ebola. Now, when it comes to Ebola, it causes internal as well as external bleeding by attacking the vessels. Now, it was first identified in 1976. All right, it was in 1976, and most of the outbreaks, they have occurred in parts of Africa, and it is the Africa that had dealt with the outbreaks of Ebola, and it has killed at least 15,000 people as well. Now, according to the WHO, it is the fruit bats which are the natural host of the Ebola virus. But then there is spillover as well, and it has spilled over to gorilla, to chimpanzee, to macaque, as well as antelope, pig, and porcupine as well. Now, any contact that is through bat saliva or dropping, it can infect the other animals, the consumption of the wild meat, and even touching objects that have been contaminated. It has an incubation period of nearly about 2 to 21 days, and the death is caused by multiple failures of the organs that are there in the body. Now, coming to the next important news is the editorial that is there in our today's The Hindu, and it is about the electric vehicles. All right. So, it is about the electric vehicles, that is India's EV ambition needs a grid strategy to match. Now, this is again very important editorial that you will find in today's The Hindu. Now, when it comes to the complete editorial, it says that India has nearly about 420 million registered vehicles, and full electrification, it needs nearly about 900 to 1,100 terawatt hour per year extra, and that is when we will have the full electrification that will be there. Now, it says that even if we do 50% of the fleet conversion, all right, if there is 50% fleet conversion by 2047, that is that there will be the need for 500 terawatt hour additionally, and that is 1/3 of the current annual generation that is there. Now, the two-wheelers which are there, they add only 55 to 75 terawatt hour, and this is visible, but again that has a very smaller grid impact that is there. At the same time, where we have the heavy goods, so the heavy goods vehicle that is, or each 1.2, we have 6.26 million of them, and each will have the impact of 1.2 to 1.5 kilowatt hour per kilometer over 60,000 kilometer a year. So when it comes to the fleet electrification, so if we will need at least 450 to 565 terawatt hour, and that is the real challenge to the supply chain. And it is not the scooters that we must worry about, it is the heavy goods vehicle that is, or that where we have the grid challenge that is in front of India. Now, over here it is also very important that when it comes to the grid stress, so there is a grid stress in the evening, because ultimately there are millions of the charging that happens simultaneously for the electric vehicles, and this is where we have the risk of the grid instability. As well as we have discoms which are already burdened by lakh crore of the losses, and there are no fund distribution for the upgrades of the discoms which are there. There are the smart charging solutions as well, that is we can use the time of use pricing where you are charging. So there could be different prices when it comes to the charging. Alright, the charging prices, it could be less during the day, and during the evening the charging prices could be higher, where we have more of the people who charge their electric vehicles. At the same time, solar or workplace charging could be there, and even the battery storage as well. When it comes to the golden quadrilateral as well as dedicated freight corridors, so there is a need for joint power mapping before the electric trucks they can reach that scale that we are moving ahead. And there is the nuclear base load as well that had been mentioned in the article, that is the micro modular reactors, they should be there for the highway corridors, and ultimately that will make them weather independent. So these are the suggestions that had been given through this editorial, or the real issue is that had been portrayed by this editorial is about not the two-wheelers but the heavy goods vehicle that poses a challenge to the grid security that we have in India. Now, what are the policy recommendations? The first one is that we should make the EV load primary variable in the national electricity policy. There should be 30%, 50% and 100% of the scenarios. There should be a mandate for the smart charging for all new infrastructure as well, and we should reform the RDSS with EV readiness benchmarks as well. There should be a clean portfolio, that is solar, that should be of low cost, then nuclear, then pumped hydro and gas. So there should be a clean portfolio when it comes to the complete allocation. And in your mains, you could be asked about the question, that is, the question could be, India's EV ambition is meaningless without a grid strategy, critically examine. So we need a grid strategy. If we want to push the electric vehicle, and we are seeing because of the prices that are increasing, that the electric vehicle will get pushed because of the rising prices of petrol and diesel. So again, we need a grid strategy so that we can implement a proper electric vehicle strategy in India as well, and we can have the boost of the electric vehicles in India. Now coming to the next important editorial, it is about the Bhojshala Kamal Mola complex in Dhar in Madhya Pradesh. Now the Madhya Pradesh High Court, it had ruled on 15th of May that the Bhojshala Kamal Mola complex in Dhar, Madhya Pradesh, it is a Hindu temple. The Muslim side have been asked to seek alternative land from the state. The High Court have denied the character determination in its final order as well. Now, Chief Justice of India, Surya Kant, he had revived the Bhojshala proceedings in January. Later on, the High Court have used the 2024 ordered ASI survey in coming to the conclusion when it comes to the complete complex. Now, the basis of this was that the preponderance of probability principle had been used from the Supreme Court's 2019 Ayodhya verdict or judgment. So there are certain concerns which had been raised in this editorial, and that is there is the procedural loophole when it comes to the the Protection of Workplace or Worship Act, that is Section 4.3, and it exempts the ancient monuments which we have in India. Often gets lost in corruption, weak governance, and short-term fixes. That's true. Now, when it comes to the Places of Worship or Places of Worship Special Provision Act of 1991, this freezes the religious character of the places, of all the places that were as on the 15th of August 1947. However, there is Section 4.1 that is there, and it says that no shoe shall lie to convert a place of the worship. And there is an exemption that had been placed by the Section 4.3 that is there of the POW Act of 1991. And it says that the ancient or the historical monuments which are under the Ancient Monuments Act of 1958, they are exempted. And over here, when it comes to the Ram Janmabhoomi, this exemption was, it was given the go through by the Supreme Court as well. All right. So there were ancient monuments, and we have seen that in the case of Ram Janmabhoomi case, the Supreme Court have decided about the Ram Janmabhoomi, and it has converted the place to the Ram Janmabhoomi itself. So over here, after the verdict of Ram Janmabhoomi, there are other contested case or the sites which have emerged, and they have used the presumption of 2019 verdict that there is the exemption of the Section 4.3 of the Places of Worship Act 1991. And we have seen this in the case of Gyan Vapi case in the Varanasi, in Shahi Idgah in Mathura, and even Bij Mandal that is there in Vidisha as well. Now, the editorial, it argues that the Places of Worship Act, it needs strict enforcement, and no archaeological survey should be there for the character determination of the sites which are there. As well as the courts, they should act as neutral. They should operate, right now they are operating in politically polarized terrain that we are seeing. And even when it comes to the PIL, they are achieving what the suits they could not in India right now. So it recommended that there should be shared use of the places, there should be the democratic coexistence that should remain in the society, and even the first ownership shouldn't drive the rulings as well. So again, it is important. Good morning, I'm not getting your name. Tukund Dalal. All right, I'll just say you Dalal. All right, good morning. So these are the things that had been discussed in the editorial, and again, this is important for your prelims because you could be asked about the provisions of the Places of Worship Act of 1991 or the ASI functions, or even the preponderance of probability doctrine as well. And again, for your mains, you can practice the question, that is the Places of Worship Act 1991 is necessary but insufficient, analyzed in the light of recent judicial developments. Alright, so when it comes to the Places of Worship Act, the general rule is that it freezes the religious character of every building as of 15th of August 1947. Alright, at the same time, when it comes to the Ayodhya dispute, it explicitly exempted, that is the Section 4.3, it was settled by the Ayodhya dispute that was there. Now, we are seeing the ancient monuments which had been exempted under Section 4.3, and this is a loophole that was used or utilized during the Ayodhya verdict itself, and then we have seen the recent litigation, that is Bhojshala or Gyan Vapi case, which had been filed into the various cases or courts that we are seeing right now. Now, coming to the next important news that we have is about the Shanti Act. And again, Shanti Act liability absurdly low. There had been a plea in the Supreme Court that we can see right now. So over here, Supreme Court have agreed to listen to this PIL, and this PIL had been filed by the retired bureaucrat who have challenged the Shanti Act of 2025. The petitioner have claimed that the act caps the operator's liability at an absurdly low level, and that is why this petition had been filed in the Supreme Court. Now, we had previously the Nuclear Disaster Liability Act, that is CLNDA 2010. And now we have the Shanti Act that has subsumed the previous act that was there. Now, when it comes to the operator base, we know that previously, before the Shanti Act, all the nuclear reactors, they were operated solely by the government. The government had the monopoly, but now, after the Shanti Act, the private and the foreign equity could be there in the nuclear reactors up to 49%. Alright, the supplier liability had been allowed by the previous act, and there was the right of recourse as well. However, in the Shanti Act, the supplier liability had been excluded and it had been channeled to operator. Very, very important, a point that you must remember for your upcoming prelims as well. Alright, when it comes to the regulator, it was AERB, that is Atomic Energy Regulatory Board that we have, and in the previous setup, it was subordinate to Department of Atomic Affairs. Now it has been it will act as the independent statutory body that is there. Earlier the liability cap was variable. It was variable and it was according to the damage that had been occurred. But now the liability had been capped at 3,000 crore rupees. That is nearly about 300 million SDR equivalent. And this is the major issue, that the liability had been capped at 3,000 crore rupees, which is very, very low, at very low level when it comes to the nuclear damages, and that is why this PIL had been filed in the Supreme Court. Now coming to the next important news that is there in our today's editorial in the Hindu, it is about the Supreme Court have allowed euthanasia of the rabid dangerous dogs, where it has refused to modify its earlier order, and it has ordered all the states and union territories to ensure the removal of the stray dogs that are there. And ultimately it has also said that in the event that we have the rabid, or we have the incurably ill and the demonstratively dangerous or the aggressive dogs, they could be euthanized even by the municipal corporation. That had been said by the Supreme Court. Alright, so over here, this is a municipal challenge that we are talking about. There is Supreme Court mandate, that is to catch, to sterilize and vaccinate and then relocate the stray dogs that are there. Now there are two instances. There are sensitive areas like, for example, schools, hospitals, bus stations, where the re-release had been strictly forbidden by the Supreme Court. Then there is the journal areas where the re-release is allowed after a treatment, that is after the sterilization and vaccination, and there will be strict monitoring by the RWAs or the residential welfare association societies, as well as the local bodies that will be there in the journal areas that will happen. Then again, another news is there in our today's The Hindu, and it is about over 400 bonded laborers. They had been rescued from Telangana clinics. So over here, my question is, it relates to which article of the Constitution? Tell me fast in the comment, in the chat box, which article prohibits the bonded labor in India? Which article prohibits bonded labor or forced labor or begar as well? Alright, it is article, yes, article 23 clause 1. It prohibits what? It prohibits bonded labor, forced labor and begar. Please remember, the term is begar. It is not beggar. Alright, generally what the students, they get confused that beggary is prohibited by article 23(1). It is not beggary that has been prohibited, it is begar. What is begar? It is where the labor is without the payment of the wages. That is what begar means. So article, again, this complete news, it then connects to article 23(1), again important for the UPSC prelims. Yes, the human trafficking as well as forced labor, the bonded labor and the begar, they had been prohibited by article 23(1). Alright, now coming to the next one, it is again an article that deals with the Italy and the India ties. And again, very, very important article, because the next stop of Prime Minister Modi will be Italy when he is there on the 5 nations tour that is there. Alright, another article is where the NHRC or the National Human Rights Commission, it has asked the union or the center to review the changes to the trans law and revisit the concerns from the community as well. Again, important article, because here the NHRC, it has noted that the amendments have removed the transgender person's right to a self-perceived gender identity, and that has caused the concerns in community. Again, we have discussed this news in detail. Again, this is very important because here NHRC has asked the center to again review its amendments that it has done. Now coming to the next important news, it is about Swan-Wolf effect that is there. Now what is Swan-Wolf effect? It is basically about the solar wind or the charged particles which are there. Now whenever the charged particles, they enter into the magnetosphere of any of the planets, so what happens is, so the magnetic field of the planet, it becomes, the solar wind becomes compressed near the magnetic boundaries, and this creates the difference in pressure or difference in the pressure gradient, and ultimately squeezes the charged particles along the magnetic field lines. All right, and that is that is where we have the closer to the stream is the area with the lower density of the charged particles, and that is what is called as Swan-Wolf effect. All right, so these the charged particles, they are squeezed along with the magnetic lines, and that is Swan-Wolf particle. Sorry, effect. There every house our mothers are unpaid laborers. Right. All right. So this is the first question that we have on the basis of today's The Hindu. The first question is, with reference to the sustainable harnessing and advancement of the nuclear energy for transforming India, or Shanti Act 2025, consider following statements. First, it completely repeals and substitutes both the Atomic Energy Act 1962 and Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act 2010. For the first time, it allows non-state and foreign entities to hold up to 74% equity in civilian nuclear power projects. Third, it grants statutory status and independence to Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. Fourth, it excludes supplier liability, limiting the operator's right of recourse to courses explicitly provided for by contract or instances of international harm. So which of the statement given above are correct that you have to answer? Right, the B or the second part is incorrect because the equity share will be 49%. So therefore, second statement is incorrect, but 1, 3 and 4 are correct. That is, the answer will be B. That is the right answer. Coming to the next question, question number 2 that is there on your screen is, it is consider following statements regarding bail jurisprudence under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or UAPA 1967. It is first, section 43D5 of the UAPA prevents the constitutional courts from granting bail if the trial is delayed, even if the pre-trial detention becomes prolonged. Second, in the Union of India versus K. Najib in 2021, the Supreme Court ruled that statutory bail restrictions do not override constitutional protections under Article 21 in cases of inordinate trial delays. Third, in Syed Iftikhar Andrabi versus NIA in 2026, the Supreme Court held that coordinate and the smaller benches are bound by larger bench decisions regarding bail under special laws. So what will be the right answer? What will be the right answer? Yes, Reshma, that's true. If we say section 43D5 of the UAPA prevents, it does not prevent. All right. It does not prevent the constitutional courts from granting the bail if the trial is delayed, even if pre-trial detention becomes prolonged. So, of course, it does not bar. There is no bar that is there on the constitutional courts, and that is why the first statement is incorrect, but the second and third are correct. So, of course, the right answer will be B, that is 2 and 3 only. All right, there is no bar, and the constitutional courts, they cannot be barred from their judicial intervention. Now, coming to the next one, with reference to the Places of Worship Special Provision Act 1991, consider the following statements. First one is, the Act freezes the religious character of all places of worship as they existed on 15th of August 1947. Second, Section 43A of the Act exempts ancient and historic monuments protected under Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act of 1958. Then, under the Indian Constitution, the legislative subject of pilgrimages within India is part of the Union list. If there is no prevention means, then why are they denying bail, sir? I didn't get your question, Ramu. Alright, so over here, what will the right answer? It will be A, that is 1 and 2. The third one is incorrect here as well. Alright, so answer will be A, that is the right answer. Alright, now coming to the next one, consider the following statements regarding Ebola virus disease or EVD. The World Health Organization or WHO can declare a public health emergency of international concern without waiting for an emergency committee's advice as well. Second, the Bundibugyo strain of the Ebola virus is highly susceptible to the widely deployed Ervebo vaccine. EVD is highly contagious and spreads primarily through airborne transmission over long distances. So what will be the right answer? Which of them are correct one? You have said C. No, it can declare. The first one is correct. The first one is correct because the WHO, it has declared. Already we have seen that the PHEIC had been declared without the consultation or without the emergency committee's advice as well in the case of the recent Ebola outbreak. Alright, when it comes to the Ervebo vaccine is not for the Bundibugyo strain because there is no vaccine that is available for Bundibugyo. So second is incorrect, and we have EVD is highly contagious and spreads primarily through airborne transmission over long distances. So again, this is when it comes to Ebola, it transfers through bodily fluids. Alright, it transfers through bodily fluids and there is no airborne transfer that happens. Alright, so there is no airborne transfer, of course. So the third one is also incorrect, and then we will have A, that is the right one, that is one only. Alright, in Act there is no bar to provide bail right. Then refuse to granting bail to Umar Khalid. See, I have spoken about constitutional courts. The constitutional courts, they cannot be barred. There is a bar. Alright, if there is a prima facie evidence that is there, so ultimately the bail should not be granted. Alright, and the person, he can stay behind the jail. But at the same time, the constitutional courts cannot be barred. Alright, so there is no specific bar on the constitutional courts in the Act itself. Got my point? Alright, the constitutional courts, they cannot be barred. The High Court and the Supreme Court, they cannot be barred from deciding the bail application. And when it comes to the preventive law, the preventive detention, so in preventive detention, the right to bail, it exists in the High Court or in the Supreme Court. The District Court, they generally do not provide the bail for the preventive detention law. Alright, it is just the High Courts and the Supreme Court where you can get the bail for your preventive detention that has happened. Now, next, consider the following statements regarding India's electric vehicle or EV transition and energy dynamics. First, electrifying 50% of India's vehicle fleet by 2047 would require generating approximately 500 terawatt of the additional electricity annually. High goods vehicle or HGVs represent less than 2% of the India's registered fleet but would account for over half of total transport electricity demand at full EV conversion. Charging commercial fleets during the evening peak hours poses no risk of grid instability if smart charging standards are not implemented. So what will be the right answer? Yeah, not C. How could be C? See, charging commercial fleet during evening peak hours, of course it poses the risk. There is no risk, but it is risk of the grid instability that could be there if the smart charging standards are not implemented. So third, it cannot be true. We have second and first which are true. That is A will be the right answer. Alright. So it will not be C, it will be A. There is risk, of course. That is what the article says about. With reference to the National Commission for Scheduled Caste or NCSC, consider the following statements. First one is, it is a constitutional body established under Article 338 of the Constitution of India. Then it has the power of civil court while investigating complaints regarding the deprivation of rights and safeguards of scheduled caste. Third, it has no authority to issue notices to state government departments or census operations officers or officers during its inquiries. So what will be the right answer here about the NCSC, that is under Article 338. So under Article 338 we have National Commission for Scheduled Caste. Under Article 338A we have National Commission for Scheduled Tribe. Under Article 338B we have National Commission for the Backward Classes. Alright, remember. Yes, here also the right answer will be A, that is 1 and 2. The NCSE has authority. All right, so third statement is incorrect, but the rest are correct. Now coming to the next one, we have question number 7. Consider following pairs of international trade agreements and their member associations. The first one is India EFTA agreement, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. Arctic Council, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden and United States. And G7 association, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom, United States and Canada. So, which of the pair given above are correctly matched? Yes, all pairs are correctly matched. So here we have D, that is the right answer. We have EFTA. So EFTA countries are, we have Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. Then Arctic Council has Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, along with Norway, Russia, United States as well as Sweden as well. Then we have G7 association, which has United States, UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, which are the members of G7 countries. Yes, D, all are correct. Next, coming to the next question, with reference to the protection of child from sexual offences or POCSO Act, consider the following statement. It defines a child as a person below the age of 18 years. Second, it mandates the establishment of special courts for the speedy trial of offences under the Act. Third, National Crime Records Bureau or NCRB data indicates that conviction rate in child sexual offence cases in states like Telangana had exceeded 80%. Which of the statement above are correct? So what will be the right answer? Yes, the conviction rate, it is far below. Alright, so when it comes to the NCRB data, so it is not high. Conviction rate is quite low or very low, you can say. It is very low. That is there in this. So again, third is incorrect. We have first and second statement which are true. So answer will be A. That will be the right answer. Alright, so that is all in today's session. I am not giving you any mains question at the end because we have discussed the mains question along with the news that we have discussed in today's session. Also, I did not find enough time to, summarize and, write down the interlinkages which are there, and you can do this on your own for today's session. At the same time, if you are preparing for the civil services for 2027 or for 2028, you can join the resolution batch that is there, which is the GS Foundation batch on StudyIQ platform. Alright, now this batch is available, and ultimately the batches or the batch will be starting from today itself, that is from 20th of May. So you can enroll and you can use the code that is BRS Live for the maximum discount. Alright, you will get the maximum discount while you are checking out on the page. You have to apply BRS Live. Alright, it could be in capital or in small, it doesn't matter. As well as you can join the public administration batch as well for the your optional preparation, and again you can use the same code, that is BRS Live, for the maximum discount. Alright. Yes, that's true, Ramu, and thank you Reshma, thank you Miss Verma, thank you Shinobi, thank you Apex, and thank you very much Ramu, thank you. Yes, I'll see you all tomorrow itself. Alright. So that would be all. I hope that you have enjoyed the complete session and the complete the Hindu analysis. If you have enjoyed it, please do like, share as well as subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss our daily the Hindu analysis every day on at the time of 9:30 a.m. Alright, at the same time for the PDF. Alright, if you are looking for the PDF of today's session, you can reach out to me on Telegram at BHANWAR_StudyIQ. Alright, so that is the Telegram channel where you will find the complete PDF of today's session. So that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Jai Hind. I'll see you all tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. That is our time for the Hindu analysis. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care and Jai Hind. Thank you.